بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Alhamdulillah, this is the fifth lesson now of the Tafseer of Surah An-Nisa, and we have reached verse 8, but we will begin by listening to verse 7 onwards, inshallah.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. للرجال نصيب مما ترك الوالدان والأقربون وللنساء نصيب مما ترك الوالدان والأقربون مما قل منه أو كثر نصيبا مفروضا. وإذا حضر القسمة أولو القربى واليتامى والمساكين فارزقوهم منه وقولوا لهم قولا معروفا. وليخشى الذين لو تركوا من خلفهم ذرية ضعافا خافوا عليهم فليتقوا الله وليقولوا قولا سديدا. إن الذين يأكلون أموال اليتامى ظلما إنما يأكلون في بطونهم نارا وسيصلون سعيرا.
جزاكم الله خيرا. So as you can probably tell from the recitation, these verses that were recited pertain to the rulings relating to yatama, the orphans, and wealth, and the distribution of one's estate or one's property after one dies. We haven't actually reached the main verse of inheritance, which inshallah bi tawfiqillahi azza wa jal we will start from next week. And on that note, I would like to remind everyone before I forget, I will be sharing a table which breaks down the rules of inheritance. It's important that you come to the lesson with that, inshallah. So what I'll do, I'll forward it to the brothers at the masjid, and they'll put it on the KIC Telegram group, inshallah. Okay, so if you haven't joined the KIC Telegram group, this will be a good time to join it, okay, because you get notified of other events as well. So it will be uploaded there. So, come to the class, next week's class, with that particular chart, and it will break down Ashab al-Furud and the Asaba, those who receive specific shares, and how it all works basically, inshallah. So we'll start going through that from next week. So bring a physical copy, print it out. I'd advise you to print it out or come with a sort of electronic copy. And also, Salat al-Isha, before I forget, I think next week will be 7:15, inshallah. So for those who come just on Wednesdays, Salat al-Jama'ah will be at 7:15, inshallah, next week. So verse 8, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, وَإِذَا حَضَرَ الْقِسْمَةَ أُولُو الْقُرْبَى وَالْيَتَامَى وَالْمَسَاكِينُ فَارْزُقُوهُم مِّنْهُ وَقُولُوا لَهُمْ قَوْلًا مَعْرُوفًا. If non-inheriting relatives, orphans or the needy are present at the time of distribution, offer them a small provision from it and speak to them kindly. So this ayah speaks about al-qisma. وَإِذَا حَضَرَ الْقِسْمَةِ. What is the qisma? The qisma is a gathering where a person will, traditionally would be the gathering where a person would determine where their wealth would go. right? So it could be that a person's on his deathbed, or it could be even after the person has died and his property now needs to be distributed. Now obviously prior to Islam and the verse of the inheritance was revealed, there was no fixed system as to how people would bequeath their wealth, how they would specifically give their wealth to their heirs and to whoever they wanted, right? So obviously it became a very critical time for many people, for the heirs, because they want to know who gets what, right? And we see this even amongst non-Muslims, like a wealthy person passes away, right? He leaves a will behind, and then you have someone who gathers all of the relatives together and they're waiting in anticipation, how much am I going to get, right? So it's a very sensitive, difficult time, because some people will probably get more, some people will probably even be denied, even though there might be a close relative. It could be a son that's denied anything, right? This is amongst non-Muslims, that is. Obviously in the Sharia, you know, the Prophet ﷺ said, "Inna Allah a'ata kulla dhi haqqin haqqahu." Allah has given every person his due right, right? You know, so it's determined by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as we will learn. So this qismah, right? And obviously this ayah was revealed before the ayah of inheritance, and that's why there's even a discussion whether this ayah has been abrogated or not, but we'll come to that discussion. So the qismah here, imagine now you're in this gathering and you know a person is about to pass away, or who has already passed away, and it's going to be made clear who will get what, who's going to inherit what. In such gatherings, it wouldn't just be a simple gathering, it would be a special like occasion. Other people will be present. Ulul qurba wal yatama wal masakin. So there will be relatives, and there might be distant relatives. So you have the immediate relatives, but you'll also have distant relatives. So you have the sons and the daughters, the parents, maybe the children, right? But then there might be uncles and cousins, right? They might think, oh, we might get a share, right? So you have the ulul qurba, you have the yatama, orphans, thinking, okay, this person is about to die, he wants to leave some wealth behind, maybe he will leave some wealth for us. Wal masakin, and the poor, right? So now imagine they all come, right, to this gathering, hoping in anticipation, maybe they will get something from this person's estate, from this person's wealth. Allah says, فَارْزُقُوهُمْ مِنْهُ. So offer them, فَارْزُقُوهُمْ مِنْهُ, offer them, a small provision, right? Offer them something from the person's property, from the person's estate. وَقُولُوا لَهُمْ قَوْلًا مَعْرُوفًا. And speak to them kindly. And speak to them kindly. So, what we can see firstly from this ayah, just before we look at the finer fiqhi details, just from an overarching sort of perspective, what we can see here is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is taking into consideration the feelings and the state of the du'afa, those who are weak and those who are vulnerable in society. As we mentioned before, Surah An-Nisa, especially the beginning part of Surah An-Nisa, focuses on the rulings pertaining to the du'afa, the weak, those who, whether it be orphans, whether it be children, whether it be women who are vulnerable in Jahili societies, to take care of them and to fulfill their rights. So there's a great sense of, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is nurturing the believers to be considerate towards those who are less fortunate, those who are weak, those who are vulnerable, and to fulfill their rights. This is something clearly that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is nurturing us to do, and to have those qualities. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is also, in these verses, He is taking care of the hearts of the weak and the needy as well. Right? He sees that these are people who are vulnerable, who are needy, and have some sort of hope and maybe some sort of anticipation that these wealthy people who are passing away, maybe they'll leave some wealth behind us. Right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is tending to the hearts of such people. So when these people, they come, ulul qurba, right? So ulul qurba here we say they are the aqarib, the relatives, right? And if in particular, if we say that this verse is muhkama, meaning it hasn't been abrogated, then it's in particular the non-legal heirs, right? Ghayrul warithin. So you have the waratha. The waratha is the plural of warith. A warith is an heir. He's a person who inherits from the deceased person, right? So you have people who have a fixed share. These are what we call the legal heirs. In Arabic, we call them ashab al-furud. Ashab al-furud are those who have a fard, meaning those who have a fixed share. Like, for example, parents have a fixed share, right? Daughters have a fixed share. Husbands have a fixed share. Wives have a fixed share, right? Daughters can have a fixed share. Daughters have a fixed share. Sons, they inherit. They're called residual heirs. They're called asaba, right? They basically take whatever remains after the legal heirs take their shares. This will be further clarified next week. But as I said, you also have other relatives who, for example, don't have a fixed share. Like an uncle, for example, or a cousin or something. Yeah? They don't have a fixed share. These are the non-legal heirs. Ghayrul waratha. They're not warithin from that perspective. So as we said, if these people attend such gatherings, as well as the yatama and orphans and the poor, Allah says, فَرُزُقُوهُمْ مِنْهُ. Give them something, provide them something, right? Give them something just to appease them, just to make it seem as though you care for them. Well, of course, you should be caring for such people, right? Meaning, give them some of your wealth before your wealth goes to your heirs, before your wealth goes to your waratha, right? So before your wealth is distributed amongst your children, your wives, your parents, what have you, meaning give some wealth to the orphans, give some wealth to the, give some of your, small amount to your, to the poor and the needy, and to distant relatives as well. Give them something, right? And this is, again, the idea here is just to, appease people, make people happy, right? Take into consideration their feelings. Don't just look at it as strictly as a matter of law. Okay, if this person deserves this, I'll give them that. Anyone else that is not entitled to anything, I'm not going to give them anything. No, right? Understand that if there are people who are hoping that you'll be generous with them, be kind and affectionate towards them. And we see this so much in the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. For example, he said in a hadith, although this is not related to inheritance per se, but he said, إِذَا جَاءَ أَحَدَكُمْ خَادِمُهُ بِطَعَامِهِ. Imagine one of your servants, he comes, he prepares your food, right? And he comes to you with your food. فَلْيُجْلِسْهُ مَعَهُ. Then look, let him sit with you. Let him sit with you. Imagine he's prepared this delicious food, right? And he's going to give it to you, and you're just scoffing it all up, right? How's he going to feel? He's going to feel, can I not have some of this food? So the Prophet ﷺ said, فَلْيُجْلِسْهُ مَعَهُ. Let him sit with him, right? فَإِن لَمْ يُجْلِسْهُ مَعَهُ. And if it's not maybe the right time for him to sit with you, right? فَلْيُنَاوِلْهُ لُقْمَةً أَوْ لُقْمَتَيْنِ. Then just give him a morsel of food, or just give him a bit of the food and say, here, take this food and enjoy it, right? Being considerate and empathetic towards other people's feelings. This is what the Qur'an and the Sunnah teaches us, right? Don't just always look at things in a legalistic way. Okay, if this is your haqq, khalas, this is your haqq. If this is not, if you don't have a haqq, I'm not going to give you anything. No, look beyond that, right? Not to say that you don't ignore the Sharia. No, fulfill the rights that the Sharia has imposed upon us, but also look to the feelings of other people as well. فَرُزُقُوهُ مِنْهُمْ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says that فَرُزُقُوهُمْ مِنْهُ. Now this is a command. So does it mean it's wajib to do this? This is something that the scholars differ over. So some scholars said that this is amrun linnadbi, meaning originally this is encouraged. It's not something which is actually wajib from a Shari'i perspective, right? So from a Shari'i perspective, technically, if a person gave all of their wealth to their waratha without allocating any of their wealth for any other purpose, technically that's jaiz, that's permissible, right? But I think in this day and age we don't have similar settings. When the qisma takes place, when the distribution of the estate takes place, you don't usually have the orphans and the poor and the needy and the distant relatives, expecting something or wanting something, right, at the time of the qisma, at the time of the distribution. Maybe the case with distant relatives, that can happen. Right? Even today I received a long question from someone who, a bit of a dispute, right, but there are some like distant relatives involved and they're anticipating that they're going to get a share. Right, so they want to know, do I have a haqq, do I have a right? And especially what happens is, and this happens so many times when people, like when they're about to die or they leave a will, they have no idea about the Shari'i rulings, about who they're meant to give their wealth to. Right? Absolutely no idea. So many people. Right? So they write in their will, okay, when I die, I want, for example, my stepson, or I want somebody else who's a non-heir, I want him to have half of my wealth. And they think because they've written it in a will, it's somehow become Shari'i. No, it's not how it works. Okay, an important point we have to realize is that when you die, that wealth of yours is no longer yours. Right? It's for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to determine how your wealth is distributed. So you have to learn these things, brothers and sisters. Right? Unfortunately, ahkam al-fara'id, the laws of inheritance, is one of the most neglected topics amongst people. Right? At the very least, know that you have something to learn about inheritance. It's not like a free-for-all, do as you please. Right? So either learn it now, or when the time comes, like when you want to write a will, or you want to, prepare in advance for how your wealth, for your property to be distributed, you have to approach at least a person of knowledge. Right? And ideally try to learn it yourself, because this is an ilm, a knowledge which not many people have. Right? And it needs to be preserved. And inshallah it will be preserved. That's, as long as we have Qur'an, it will be preserved. Right? But this is just an encouragement from me for you to, inshallah, make the effort to learn these ahkam. So anyhow, so the scholars they said that this is this encouragement to farzuquhum minhu, that give them some of this wealth, even though it's in a command form, it's a matter of recommendation, meaning it's recommended for you to do this. Right, as instructed by the ayah. And this is obviously all in the situation where it's feasible for you, right, and you have sufficient amount of wealth, and considering your heirs are not very poor. If it's the case, for example, your heirs are very poor, meaning the people who are meant to inherit from you are very poor, and you haven't left that much wealth behind, then it doesn't really make sense for you to give away some of your wealth to a non-heir, unless it's a very small amount. Right? It's better for you to give to your rightful heirs, and we'll see this. Right? We'll see this, and in some hadith that we will narrate, inshallah. And so here Allah says, فَارْزُقُوهُمْ مِنْهُ وَقُولُوا لَهُمْ قَوْلًا مَعْرُوفًا. And say to them, and speak to them kindly. Speak to them kindly. So this is a separate injunction. This is a separate command. Speak to them kindly. Again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is taking care of the feelings and the emotions of these vulnerable people. But why is there a command to give them something, and at the same time, in addition to giving them something, say something kind to them? Right? Now, you can imagine, especially if we consider this command to be an obligation, right? Sometimes when something is imposed upon you, you do it grudgingly, isn't it? Right? Oh, this is something I have to do. Okay, here, take it. Right? And you might think, oh, you're just a miskeen, right? A poor person, you're just like a beggar, you're a useless person. Right, here, take this money. No, when you give them that money, right, don't just view it as again, like a legal responsibility and a right. Say unto them, a good word. And that's why some mufassirin interpreted qawlan ma'rufa to actually mean make dua for them. Like, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you with this wealth. Right? Don't commit adha, like don't harm them when giving them the money. Allah mentions this also in Surah Al-Baqarah as well. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbids man and adha. Man is when you remind them constantly, oh, I have given you so much money in the past, and and you keep reminding them of the fact that they are in need. And adha is like you're harming them, like psychologically, you're like, what's wrong with you? You're just a useless person. Right? Look how much, subhanAllah, this is the beauty of the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and that of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself. From his sifat we can learn the immense care and consideration he gives to those people who are in need. This is one understanding. وَقُولُوا لَهُمْ قَوْلًا مَعْرُوفًا, and say unto them a good word. Some scholars were of the opinion that here this is in reference to those who don't end up receiving anything. Right? So in the situation, for example, where a person dies and he doesn't actually have that much wealth to give, so he ends up giving it to his heirs, and so all those poor people that are waiting, right, the masakeen, the poor, the orphans, and these people, they're waiting, maybe they'll get something, but they don't end up getting anything. They don't end up getting anything. So what do you do to them? Do you say, tough luck, there's nothing for you, sorry, go away? No. Say to them say to them a good thing. Just say, we're very sorry, I'm very sorry, I don't have anything really to give you. Right? Just soothe their feelings, ease their worries and their concerns. Just say, look, unfortunately, there's nothing for me to give you. Right? Don't push them away. Don't be harsh in repelling them. So وَقُولُوا لَهُمْ قَوْلًا مَعْرُوفًا. Now, as we mentioned before, this hukum, right, is it a hukum which is still applicable to today? Or is it the case that it has been abrogated? Because remember what we mean by abrogation. Okay, we discussed this in some depth when we were looking at Surah Al-Baqarah. مَا نَنْسَخْ مِنْ آيَةٍ, but the ayah of abrogation. But remember, the laws of inheritance were revealed, not the beginning of Islam, but clearly in the Madani period. Right, so it was gradually legislated. And so many scholars are of the opinion that this was the initial ruling before people were designated their rightful shares. Right? So meaning it was a case that, if a person was to die or he died, the person who's been entrusted to take care of his estate, of the deceased estate, or if he wrote it in his wasiyah, or if it was, people testified to his wasiyah that X, Y, and Z should get this amount, right? Then that would be enacted. This was later abrogated by the ayah of mirath, which is which we will study from ayah number 11. And this is the view of the majority of the scholars. In fact, the A'imma al-Arba'a, the 4 Imams. So according to the 4 Imams, right, this ayah is mansukha. This ayah has been abrogated. Although you find many scholars, even within the madhahib, and there are other aqwal within the madhahib, that no, this ayah actually isn't abrogated. It's still applicable. It's still applicable. Right? And there are many statements of the tabi'een to that effect. Like Sa'id ibn al-Jubayr, he said, هذه الآية يتهاون بها الناس. He said, this is an ayah basically that people have, they've neglected. This is a neglected ayah, meaning it's not abrogated. And this is the view of Imam al-Tabari, in fact. The view of Imam al-Tabari is that it's a muhkama. The ayah is muhkama. It's not mansukha, it's muhkama, meaning it's still meant to be implemented. Right? Because it doesn't go against the verse of inheritance according to his understanding. Right? Al-Hasan al-Basri said a similar thing, that this ayah is thabita, it's established, meaning it's not abrogated. وَلَكِنَّ النَّاسَ بَخِلُوا وَشَحُّوا. But people, unfortunately, what it is, Al-Hasan al-Basri said, people just become miserly. They just become stingy. Because remember, we said majority of the scholars understood, if we say فَرُزُقُوهُم مِّنْهُ, although it's a direct command, we said it's for nud, it's recommendation. Right? And so they say, oh, okay, it's not fard, so I don't have to give some money to the poor and to the orphans and the needy. Right? So I just give it all to my heirs and my descendants, etc. Right? So this was a view of many of the earlier scholars. Right? Right. Now, according to Ibn Kathir, right? According to Ibn Kathir, this view is, he attributes it to Imam Tabari and says, وَهَذَا الْقَوْلُ غَرِيبٌ. He said, this is an opinion which is a bit odd, especially the part relating to that فَرْزُقُوهُم مِّنْهُ, meaning give some wealth to them, and as for the other people you don't give any wealth to, then say to them a good word, like basically, I'm sorry, there's not much we can give you. Right? He said this seems to be a somewhat of an odd opinion. Because if you look to the Arabic, it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about the same group of people. فَارْزُقُوهُم مِّنْهُ وَقُولُوا لَهُمْ قَوْلًا مَعْرُوفًا. Right? He's addressing like give them something and say to them, yani the same group of people. But the likes of Imam Tabari and others from the Tabi'een, they said no, فَارْزُقُوهُم مِّنْهُ, yani those who inherit from you, give them something. And as for the people who you don't give them anything, then say to them a good word. Right? So it's an opinion at the end of the day, right? It's a valid opinion at the end of the day. It's attributed to some of the Tabi'een, and this is also the view of Imam al-Mufassirin, Imam al-Tabari, rahimahullah, as we mentioned. But otherwise, what we said is that this ayah is mansukha, right? According to the majority of the scholars, that this ayah has been abrogated by the verse of inheritance, because the verse of inheritance tells people what they are entitled to exactly. The argument, and another argument Imam al-Tabari actually brings forward as well, is that look, in order for there to be abrogation, there have to be two distinct and different and opposing rulings. Right? So, for example, alcohol, either it's like halal or at one stage it's halal to drink as long as you're not drunk, and then it becomes completely forbidden. These are clearly two very different rulings, isn't it? So one abrogates the other. But here he says there's no need for abrogation. How does this verse oppose verse 11? This is the argument. Because all the ayah is saying, it's saying that when it comes to the time of qismah, just keep a small amount of wealth for the poor and needy. That's all it's really saying, right? Keep a small amount of wealth for the poor and needy, and that's already established in the sunnah. So there's no real need to say that there's no pressing reason to say that, okay, is this ayah abrogated or not? This is Imam at-Tabari's understanding, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best about that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He then says in verse 9, وَلْيَخْشَى الَّذِينَ لَوْ تَرَكُوا مِنْ خَلْفِهِمْ ذُرِّيَّةً ضِعَافًا خَافُوا عَلَيْهِمْ فَلْيَتَّقُوا اللَّهَ وَلْيَقُولُوا قَوْلًا سَدِيدًا. Let the guardians be as concerned for the orphans as they were if they were to die and leave their own helpless children behind. So let them be mindful of Allah and speak equitably. Or, according to Yusuf Ali's translation, which is also good as well, let those disposing of an estate have the same fear in their minds as they would have for their own if they had left a helpless family behind. Let them fear God and speak words of appropriate comfort. I actually like this translation in particular. Probably give preference to it over Mustafa Khattab's translation in this case. The reason being is because this ayah is not an easy ayah to understand. It's not an easy ayah to understand for a number of reasons. Okay, so here, firstly, وَلْيَخْشَى الَّذِينَ لَوْ تَرَكُوا. Allah is telling people, a certain group of people, وَلْيَخْشَى الَّذِينَ. Who is this khitab to? Who is Allah speaking to here? Right? What is the context here? What is the scenario here? This is where we find that there are numerous ways of looking at this verse. One way of looking at this verse is where Ibn Abbas, he said, هذا في الرجل. Ibn Abbas, this is one view that is attributed to Ibn Abbas. He says, هذا في الرجل يحضره الموت. This ayah is in reference to a man who يحضره الموت. Death is around the corner. So he realized he's going to die soon, and now he needs to determine how to distribute his wealth. فيسمعه الرجل يوصي بوصية تضر بورثته. So a man, he hears this. He hears, right, he's present, and he hears how this man wants to distribute his inheritance. But then he realizes he's doing it in a way which is unjust. Like some people, what they do, which is very common, person is about to die and he has a grudge with someone in his family. He has a grudge with his son, with his daughter, with his wife, with his mother, with his father, whoever it may be. Right? And he denies them any share of his inheritance. And this happens a lot amongst non-Muslims. In Sharia, this can't happen. This is not allowed. This can't happen. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, فَأَمَرَ اللَّهُ ta'ala, Allah commands the one who hears this and yattaqillah, that he should be fearful of Allah, وَيُوَفِّقُهُ وَيُسَدِّدُهُ لِلصَّوَابِ, and that when you're hearing this, you should tell that person who's about to die, no, you know, this is wrong. What you're doing is wrong. This is not right. This is unjust. So the khitab here, we can see, according to this understanding of Ibn Abbas, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is addressing those who are close to the person who is about to die, and they've heard how the inheritance is going to be distributed unjustly. Right? And so, وَلْيَنْظُرْ لِوَرَثَتِهِ كَمَا كَانَ يُحِبُّ أَنْ يُصْنَعَ بِوَرَثَتِهِ إِذَا خَشِيَ عَلَيْهِمُ الضَّيْعَةِ. And so Allah commands him to be considerate, meaning the one who Allah is addressing, the man who is, or the person who is listening to this man who is about to die, and he bears witness to his, or he's seeing how he's going to distribute his inheritance, and Allah is commanding him to think about the heirs of this person who's about to die as though they are his own heirs. Right? So imagine a man's about to die and he says, you know what? I don't want any of my sons to get any of my inheritance. And you're hearing this, right? And you think, subhanallah. Allah is telling you, be considerate. Imagine those sons were your sons. Right? Imagine, and those sons were weak and like poor and they needed help. How would you feel? Right? So what would you do if that was your sons? Well, you would quickly go to that person and say, no, this is haram, this is dhulm. Right? You should give something to your sons. Right? This is the meaning of the ayah. So, وَلْيَخْشَى الَّذِينَ, Allah is telling those people to have khashya, and fear Allah, those who لَوْ تَرَكُوا مِنْ خَلْفِهِمْ ذُرِّيَّةً ضِعَافًا, meaning if you were a people who left behind you ذُرِّيَّةً ضِعَافًا, if you left behind you weak and orphans, خَافُوا عَلَيْهِمْ, you are fearful for them. فَلْيَتَّقُوا اللَّهِ, يعني be fearful of Allah. وَلْيَقُولُوا قَوْلًا سَدِيدًا, and say the right words. Meaning, what are the right words? قَوْلًا سَدِيدًا here. قَوْلًا سَدِيدًا refers to what you should say to the musi. The musi is the one who is going to bequeath his wealth. Right? Meaning, you say to him, because sadid, what does sadid mean? Sadid here means as-sawab, means correct. Right? Say to him the correct word, meaning say to him, no, this isn't how you should be distributing your wealth. You should be giving a portion to your sons who are needy. Yeah? This is one understanding of the verse. And not many people have translated the verse like this. Right? They haven't translated the verse like this, as you will see. So if you read Mustafa Khattab's translation, let the guardians be as concerned for the orphans as they would if they were to die and leave their own helpless children behind. So let them be mindful of Allah and speak equitably. So it's very different, right? So let's look at the other views. So this is one view, as we mentioned, right? And this was attributed to Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu. And this was also reported on Mujahid and others. And is reported in the Sahihain that when Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas was very ill and he was worried that he thought that he might die, he said, Ya Rasulullah, inni dhu malin wa la yarithuni illa ibnatan. Afa atasaddaqu bi thuluthi mali. He said, O Messenger of Allah, I have a lot of wealth behind and no one's going to inherit from me other than this daughter of mine. Afa atasaddaqu bi thuluthi mali. Should I give 2/3 of my wealth away in charity? 2/3 of his wealth away in charity, which will mean he will only leave, a third for his daughter. قال لا. The Prophet said, no. قال فالشطر. Okay, what if I leave half of my wealth? What if I give half of my wealth away to charity? قال لا. He said, no. قال فالثلث. Okay, what about a third? What about if I give a third away in charity and the rest will go to my heirs? قال الثلث والثلث كثير. Okay, you can give a third, but even then a third is quite a lot. Even then a third is quite a lot. And then the Prophet ﷺ, he said, إِنَّكَ أَن تَذَرَ وَرَثَتَكَ أَغْنِيَا خَيْرٌ مِّنْ أَن تَذَرَهُمْ عَالَةً يَتَكَفَّفُونَ النَّاسِ. For you to leave your heirs wealthy is better for you than to leave them poor and begging other people. So the Prophet ﷺ, what is he instructing Sa'd here, radiallahu anhu? He's saying, look, be considerate. When you're about to leave your wealth behind, be considerate to those who are meant to inherit from you. Don't deny them what they are, what you should be giving them. Right? But now obviously when the ayat of inheritance were revealed, we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave people their fixed shares. Right? وَالثُّلُثُ وَالثُّلُثُ كَثِيرٌ. And even then, many scholars would say even a third, it's encouraged to give less than that. Right? That if you want to, meaning, if you want to give a portion of your estate away to like waqf or charity or sadaqah jariyah, you can do so, but it's better to give less than a third, ideally. right? And it's better to, especially if your heirs are needy. Yeah? But otherwise, in principle, as we said, that's what a person can do. He can give up to a third of his wealth to a non-heir, like a distant, far distant relative, or to a neighbor, or someone who, right, or a masjid, or a waqf, right, or a sadaqah jariyah. You can do that as part of your wasiyah. Now, so again, going back to the question of who is being addressed, right? So we said that the one understanding is that the person who is being addressed is the one who is present, right? The one who is present, and he is hearing the Musi. Musi is the one who's giving the wasiyah. He's giving the basically the final testament, or where he's going to bequeath his wealth, right? And he realizes that what he's doing is wrong, right? And so Allah is telling him to instruct him that, look, think, if that was you, what would you do, right? Be considerate, be empathetic, right? Don't allow injustice to take place. So Ibn al-Jawzi rahimahullah, we'll go down, we'll actually read from Ibn al-Jawzi's Tafseer, because he breaks it down quite well in a succinct way. So he says, look, there are three ways that you can look at this verse. Number one, أنه خطاب للحاضرين عند الموصي, as we mentioned. This is a khitab to the hadirin. This is an address to those who are present at the gathering. وفي معنى الآية, and therefore the meaning, if we say that this ayah is addressing those people, then it can have two possible interpretations, i.e., number one, وليخشى الذين يحضرون موصيا في ماله أن يأمروه بتفريقه في من لا يرثه. Right? So the idea is that you instruct them, you instruct those who are about to die, to not give all of your wealth away to non-heirs. Yeah? So you say, for example, if this person was to die, is about to die, say, I don't want any of my sons to have any of my inheritance. So you instruct him and you say no, as we mentioned. Yeah? فَيُفَرِّقُهُ وَيَتْرُكْ وَرَثَتَهُ. So he abandons his waratha, his heirs. No. This is one understanding, right? The second way of looking at this, على الضد من هذا القول. It's the opposite essentially. وهو أنه نهي للحاضر الموصي أن يمنعوه من الوصية لأقاربه وأن يأمروه بالاقتصار على ولده. Slightly different, right? This is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's forbidding the musi, right? He is forbidding the hadirin, those who are present at the gathering, from instructing this person, from basically confining the inheritance to, only his children. The opposite. Right? So imagine the person, he's about to die, he said, for example, I want only my sons to inherit from my wealth. The opposite. And so therefore his wife doesn't get anything, his daughters don't get anything, orphans don't get anything, nobody else. It's all confined to the sons. So it's the opposite way around. Right? That's the second way of looking at if we say that the one who is being addressed is the hadir, the one who is present at the time of the distribution. The second view now is that the person who is being addressed in this ayah is actually the awliya of the yatama, the guardians of the orphans. Right? And this is how you find many of the people have translated it. Right? And let those who were they themselves to leave behind the helpless children, meaning as if to say, look, if you're if you're about to die and you have children, you have heirs, and you have orphans. You have children and you have orphans. So naturally, a person will want to only consider, mostly, you'll find most people will probably want to give all of their wealth away to who? Their children, isn't it? But Allah is saying basically, look, be considerate. Look at these orphans as though they are like your children. Yeah? Imagine they were dhurriyatan di'afa. Imagine, they were like your poor, weak children. Surely you should consider them in your distribution as well. Right? So فَمَعْنَى الْكَلَامِ, so the meaning of this interpretation, أَحْسِنُوا فِي مَنْ وُلِّيتُم مِّنَ الْيَتَامَى, be good to those orphans that you have decided to take care of. كَمَا تُحِبُّونَ أَنْ يَحْسُنَ وُلَاةُ أَوْلَادِكُمْ بَعْدَكُمْ, just as you would like your sons and your daughters to be treated after you, right? Treat them well as well. Treat them well as well. The third view that he mentions is that this is in reference to the awsiya, and this is Allah is addressing al-awsiya. These are which is the plural of the wasi, and the wasi is like in this case the authorized agent, right, to distribute somebody's estate. So Allah is commanding those people, the authorized agents, the awsiya, to fulfill the wasiyah. أُمِرُوا بِأَدَاءِ الْوَصِيَّةِ عَلَى مَا رَسَمَ الْمُوسِي. So the testator is the one who is, he's the one who's going to die, and he's the person who's giving the wasiyah. He's going to say, when I die, for example, I want my inheritance to be distributed like this, right? And so he instructs somebody to fulfill that. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is commanding these people to have the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, be mindful of it, right? And not to deny people their shares. Don't deny people their shares. Treat the people in this person's will as though they are like your own children. If your own children were weak and needy, dhurriyatan di'afa, right? They were weak and needy, you would be considerate towards them. So, now this leads on to another discussion, therefore, is this ayah considered, is it muhkama or mansukha? Right? Is it still in practice, or is it mansukha? Well, clearly, as we mentioned, it is not an obligation for a person to leave anything behind for an orphan or for weak, poor people. So from that perspective, we can say that it's abrogated. A person isn't required. And remember, Islam has come to determine what everybody gets anyway, right? So this ayah was really revealed regarding the times where there was no fixed allotment for what people would receive. So from that perspective, we can say that it is abrogated. But the meaning of being considerate towards orphans and the poor and the needy is still very much applicable. فَلْيَتَّقُوا اللَّهَ وَلْيَقُولُوا قَوْلًا سَدِيدًا. Let them fear Allah and let them say a correct word. Imam al-Razi, he says something very nice about this. He says, فَكَأَنَّهُ قَالَ, it's as if Allah is saying, فَلْيَتَّقُوا اللَّهَ فِي الْأَمْرِ الَّذِي تَقَدَّمَ ذِكْرُهُ وَلْيَحْتِيَاطُ فِيهِ. And Allah is telling people to be conscious, be mindful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when it comes to this issue. وَلْيَقُولُوا قَوْلًا سَدِيدًا. Let him say a correct word. إِذَا أَرَادُوا بَعْثَ غَيْرِهِمْ عَلَى فِعْلٍ وَعَمَلٍ وَقَوْلُ السَّدِيدِ وَلْيَقُولُوا قَوْلًا سَدِيدًا. Yani if you want to tell someone to do an action, make sure that you're mindful of Allah and that you tell them to do that which is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Oh, I just realized there's a bit missing from the text. Okay, not a problem. He said something else after that. For some reason, it's not there. Okay, maybe I'll share with you next time, inshallah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He then says, moving on to the next verse. إن الذين يأكلون أموال اليتامى ظلما إنما يأكلون في بطونهم نارا وسيصلون سعيرا. Indeed, those who unjustly consume orphans' wealth, in fact consume nothing but fire into their bellies, and they will be burned in a blazing hell. So in this ayah we can see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is reminding people not to consume the orphan's wealth, which we've already discussed before. وَلَا تَأْكُلُوهَا إِسْرَافًا وَبِدَارًا أَن يَكْبَرُوا. Right? We've discussed that already. But why is it being reiterated at this particular stage? Why is it being reiterated at this particular stage? Because here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is speaking about the rights of orphans. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is trying to reiterate the importance of being mindful of your financial dealings. Don't treat them, manage your finances based upon hawa, based upon your whims. Base it upon the sharia, base it upon the dictates of Islamic law. And one thing that might happen when it comes to inheritance is that when a person, especially if you're a wali, imagine you have children, right? And you're taking care of a very wealthy orphan and you're about to die. Can you see what might potentially happen now? Right? So you are financially, imagine, the orphan you're taking care of, he inherited £1 million from his father. You're taking care of that. And you have five children who are quite poor, and you actually don't have that much money, but you're about to die. And now the time has come for you to write your will, and you're thinking about, right? What do you think can happen? He can claim that all of this money is his. So when I die, split this £1 million between the orphans and between my sons. No, this is haram. Right? Naturally, what happens, when it comes to inheritance, greed always seems to supersede everything, right? Family ties, friendships, brotherhood, sisterhood, parenthood, right? Everyone is after their share. It's really sad, right? It's very unpleasant as well, right? When you see this, this sort of greed coming out of people, and this is what often leads to so many disputes, right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is warning people, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ يَأْكُلُونَ أَمْوَالَ الْيَتَامَى ظُلْمًا. Those who unjustly consume orphans' wealth, in fact, إِنَّمَا يَأْكُلُونَ فِي بُطُونِهِمْ نَارًا. They're just consuming fire into their bellies. Now this is obviously a type of metaphorical expression to indicate that, they're doing something that will lead to them being punished in the fire. In fact, there are some hadith that mention how on the Day of Judgment, people will come out of their graves, smoke coming out of their mouths and of their bellies and of their ears, fire coming out even, right? And that's a result. And this is in some hadith of the Mi'raj where the Prophet saw people being punished, right, in Jahannam. And when he said, "Who are these people?" he said, "These are the people who consume the wealth of orphans." This is why it's considered to be from the kaba'ir, from the major sins, to touch the wealth of orphans. Right, and this is why you find, many scholars they narrate that when this verse was actually revealed, people became very scared, right, to deal with orphans, right? Because they thought, well, if I consume one thing unrightfully, this is going to lead me to the hellfire. So when this verse was actually revealed, انطلق من كان عنده يتيم, those who had orphans, فعزل طعامه من طعامه, they'll keep their food separate, their water and their drink, everything was kept separate because they were so scared. Like, I don't want to consume, the wealth of this orphan, right? And so it became really difficult for them to live like this. Very difficult for them to live like this. Those who probably like went to uni campuses and stayed on, you have your food, isn't it, in the fridge? Like you mark your, this is my food, right? Don't touch my food. So it becomes difficult to live like that, isn't it? Right? And that's why actually Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed, وَيَسَأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْيَتَامَى. And they ask you, this is what previous ayah, and this was Allah revealed later on, this ayah is in Surah Al-Baqarah, they ask you concerning orphans. قُلْ إِصْلَاحٌ لَهُمْ خَيْرٌ. Like say, being good to them, right, is good. Don't allow your fear to be too harsh with them, right? وَإِن تُخَالِطُوهُمْ فَإِخْوَانُكُمْ. Like if you mix with them, at the end of the day, they're like your brothers. You can mix with them, not a problem, right? But don't, وَاللَّهُ يَعْلَمُ الْمُفْسِدَ مِنَ الْمُصْلِحِ. Allah knows who is corrupt from amongst you, basically, and those who have sinister, motives when it comes to managing the wealth, all right? So, what you can take from this is the attitude of the Sahaba. When these verses were revealed, it had a severe impact, it had a significant impact. They were fearful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They were worried, right? And so we should follow in similar pattern as well. When we hear these verses, be extremely mindful about our finances, being mindful about who is entitled to what, not to be unjust, not to deny people their due rights, but also to be considerate to other people's feelings and emotions as well at the same time. This is something that we can take from these verses. So, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ يَأْكُلُونَ أَمْوَالَ الْيَتَامَى ظُلْمًا إِنَّمَا يَأْكُلُونَ فِي بُطُونِهِمْ نَارًا وَسَيَصْلَوْنَ سَعِيرًا. And they will be burned in a blazing fire. سَيَصْلَوْنَ الصِّلَاء والصلاة with a hamza at the end. هو التسخن بالنار. It is بقرب النار. It refers to, it doesn't just mean entering the fire, but when you approach something which is really hot, you start feeling the heat when you're close by. And as-sila refers to you basically starting to burn before you even touching the fire, just to show you the intensity of the fire. Right? وَسَيَصْلَوْنَ سَعِيرًا. And the sa'ir is just another reference to the hellfire itself. But it actually refers to al-jamr, al-mushta'al. It refers to like the embers, right? The coal of the hellfire. It's so hot that it burns itself. Right? So it's a blazing fire. وَسَيَصْلَوْنَ سَعِيرًا. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. That concludes today's lesson. And inshallah from next week, as we mentioned, we will be starting the major verse relating to inheritance. So be prepared for that. I'd advise you to come with a notepad, right? You might want to brush up on fractions, okay, adding fractions, etc. That will help, inshallah ta'ala. So we'll open the floor for questions, inshallah, as usual. We're on Slido, sli.do, and the code is Tafseer, TAFSEER. Yeah. The difference, yaslawna and yuslawna, yuslawna sa'ira basically means they will be entered rather than they will enter. Yaslawna meaning they will enter. Yusla implies that there is someone who is making them enter. Yeah? Next week we will cover it. But basically legal heirs, these are what we call ashab al-furud. These are the people that Allah mentions in the next ayah. And so then in the next ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will speak about husbands, wives, parents, right? Sons and daughters, etc. These are the legal heirs. The chart that I'm going to give, which will be in the Telegram chat, that will determine the legal heirs. Then you have what is called the residual heirs, or the non-legal heirs. You have residual heirs are those who basically take whatever is left after those people have taken their fixed shares. Right? So for example, if a person died and they left behind, say, they left behind, a man dies and he leaves behind, say, a wife and a son. Right? The wife will get she has a fixed share in this case, which would be an eighth. The son takes the remaining. So he's the residual heir. He takes what remains. Yeah, the asaba. And then you have other distant relatives, right? Other distant relatives, maybe like uncles and etc. Right? After the legal heirs and the residual heirs take their share, if there's still something left over, then the non-legal heirs can potentially inherit as well. But inshallah, this will all be broken down, inshallah, from next week, inshallah. Can we, okay, let me just look at the related questions. Can we infer from Ayah 9 that we should prevent an injustice from happening if we are able? Absolutely. Right? If you see something wrong, this is a part of our belief as Muslims. If you see something wrong and, and this often happens, by the way, especially when it comes to family-related issues. Yeah? Sometimes we have a false sense of our duty to our parents and family. And we think, oh, Islam tells us to be good to our parents. So even if our parents do haram or wrong, we will turn a blind eye. No, that's not Islam telling you to do that. Maybe that's something else. It's a cultural thing. Right? It's a cultural thing. Like sometimes being dutiful to your parents. People are dutiful to their parents because that's their culture. So even if their parents told them to do something haram, well, I have to listen. They're my parents at the end of the day. Or if they do haram, you turn a blind eye and say, well, I have to be good to my parents. Right? No, you have to, in these situations, these are the times where people often turn a blind eye to dhulm. Right? You know that someone's committing dhulm, but, it's a very sensitive matter. I don't want to step on my parents' toes or my children's toes or my uncle's toes or whoever it may be. Right? So, فَلْيَتَّقُوا اللَّهِ وَلْيَقُولُوا قَوْلًا سَدِيدًا. Be mindful of Allah, be fearful of Allah, and say that which is correct. Wallahu a'lam. When I see other people doing haram with the opposite gender, I feel like I want that the feeling consumes me. How do I deal with this feeling? Well, ask yourself, what is it that makes you feel that way? Why is it that particular sin in particular? Do you feel the same when someone commits shirk, or someone disbelieves, or someone doesn't pray? Right? Because you should feel the same when someone doesn't pray. Probably more, in fact, because prayer is a greater issue. So I don't know. You have to maybe ask yourself, what is it, right, that makes you feel that way? Is it hand raised? Yeah. Yeah.
Can a son inherit from a father who is not practicing Muslim?
Yeah, as long as he's Muslim, meaning he's a non-Muslim. Oh, this is a new categorization, right? So we have Muslim and you have non-Muslim. A non-practicing Muslim, usually, as in he's kafir, he says, I'm kafir. Okay, if he says, I'm not Muslim, and he dies, he's not Muslim, right? So in principle, no. Right? You cannot inherit from a non-Muslim, in principle. Right? There are some discussions whether a person, for example, is a new Muslim, right, and his parents died. His parents were originally non-Muslim, right? Can they inherit from him? There is a fatwa that allows that in certain circumstances, right? But in principle, we're talking about like a murtad. Is it the case that the father was a Muslim and then he became a non-Muslim?
Yes.
Like that, okay. Then he doesn't inherit from him. Yeah, he doesn't inherit from him. Allahu a'lam. Yes. It goes to other causes. Yeah, but it's not to be inherited from a Muslim. people of two different religions do not inherit from each other. Yeah, that's the principle. People of two different religions will never inherit from each other. Yeah. What if forbidding haram will make people think Islam is harsh and turn them away? Is it better to be silent then? Then it really depends on the way you present the way that you forbid the matter, right? Because you can forbid something in a non-harsh way. Allah says, قُولُوا لَهُمْ قَوْلًا لَيِّنًا قُولَ لَهُ قَوْلًا لَيِّنًا. Like say to, like Allah told Musa and Harun, say unto him, قَوْلًا لَيِّنًا لَعَلَّهُ يَتَذَكَّرْ أو يَخْشَى, that maybe he will remember, will be fearful. Right? So, and he committed great dhulm and injustice, and he was committing great crimes. So even if the matter is really severe, you can still tell someone in a gentle way. Right? So it's a matter of education. It's a matter of not foaming at the mouth and screaming at them and saying, no, this is haram, you can't do this, and right? You have to approach it with wisdom and hikmah. Husband is asking me to not see my family, sister, and is also not allowing my kids to see them. Do I have to follow his orders? Obedience to your husband is not mutlaq. It's not absolute. If your husband tells you to jump up, you don't have to jump up. Right? Obedience to your husband, according to the majority of the fuqaha, pertains to his specific needs. In particular, his sexual needs. Right? Beyond that, it is a matter of virtue for you to obey. This is a common misunderstanding that many men have, that my wife has to obey me in absolutely everything. So if I tell her, you can't visit your parents, if visiting your parents means that he doesn't get his rights fulfilled, that's something else. Right? That's something else. But in principle, of course, a woman should, again, not to look at this in a legalistic way. Again, this is a problem that we find many people have. They want to know their rights. So, okay, if this is not your right, I don't have to listen to you in this. That's not how we should live as husbands and wives, isn't it? Right? We should be loving and caring and considering to one another. If your spouse asks you to do something, you shouldn't ask, do I have to do it legally? You should ask, let me try and accommodate that to the best of my ability. This is mu'ashara bil ma'roof. This is living with one another in bil ma'roof, in kindness and in equity. Right? But purely from a legal perspective, if your husband denies you and to see your family, right? Because seeing your family is your haqq, is from silatul rahim, is fulfilling the ties of kinship. Technically, he doesn't have a right to deny you that right. He doesn't have that right to deny you that right. And also, not to allow your kids to see them as well. I mean, obviously, there's going to be further discussions in this, in terms of why is he denying them? What is it? Is it just out of spite he's doing that? Or is it because he thinks that, for example, his children will be corrupted if he goes over? These are the sort of things that people say, right? But sometimes it's the problem is deeper than that. Right, there are other issues festering within the marriage, which is what leads people to, demand such things. But my advice to you is, don't look at these matters purely from a legal perspective, right? Even though it's good to know your right at the end of the day and whether you have to do these things or not. But don't try to resolve them, right, by just saying, look, I don't have to do this. If your husband is telling you you're not allowed to go and visit your family, that's a serious issue. That's, that really tells you there is something terribly wrong in that marriage. That's what needs to be resolved. Right? He should be spoken to, or, maybe someone should come and reconcile, sit both of them down and see, why is this happening? Why is this husband, not allowing his wife to see her family? Yeah. Allahu a'lam. Allah make it easy for everyone. Are we not allowed to keep gifted inheritance family heirlooms from non-Muslims or family members after death? We'll discuss gifts later, inshallah. Right? We'll discuss gifts as well later, inshallah. Shaitan makes haram things attractive to me, like having a girlfriend. How do I deal with this and stop that? فَلْيَتَّقُوا اللَّهِ. Be mindful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees everything that you do. Right? اتق الله أن يكون الله أهون الناظرين إليك. Be mindful of Allah such that He doesn't become the most insignificant of those who look at you. Right? لا تجعل الله أهون الناظرين إليك. Don't make Allah the most insignificant of those who look at you. Try to develop a sense of muraqabah, awareness that Allah sees everything that you do. Right? If you develop that habit of, always putting yourself in a position, Allah sees everything that I do, you become more conscious about your behavior and your actions. Imagine a CCTV camera constantly following you around. How would you feel? You would be conscious and aware of everything that you do, isn't it? Right? You need to develop that sense, muraqabah. And ta'bud Allah كأنك تراه فإن لم تكن تراه فإنه يراك. Worship Allah as though you see Him. If you can't reach that, if you cannot see Him, then know that He sees you. Right? This is ihsan. This is worshipping Allah upon soundness. Is your wudu invalidated after touching the opposite gender, as in an accidental touch, for example, when handling them something? This is only in the Shafi'i school of thought. Only in the Shafi'i school of thought. The other madhahib, they say touching the opposite gender only breaks wudu if you touch with desire, shahwa. This is the Hanbali school. In the Hanafi school, أَوْ لَامَسْتُمُ النِّسَاءَ, or the ayah which mentions unless you've touched women, they say that actually refers to actual intimacy, intercourse itself. So there are different views, okay, but only the Shafi'is say that just touching a woman, right, just skin contact breaks wudu, right, and it's quite a it's a minority view, and it will be very difficult to to practice that. Wallahu a'lam. What if after you remind the people about the wrongdoing of injustice, then they don't listen? What should you do? Well, you've done your part. If you've done your part and you've told them what they're doing is wrong and you've given them advice, then khalas, you've done your part. What more can you do? Would it be allowed for me to fly to Jeddah by myself to meet my father and brother? I decided to join them for Umrah after they had booked their flights. So I'm assuming, obviously, this is a sister. In principle, this is not allowed. In principle, this is not allowed. The traditional understanding of the fuqaha is that a woman is not allowed to travel without a mahram. Right? Some scholars gave the exception if it was Hajj, right? And she travels, and it's a Hajj which is wajib. It's an obligatory Hajj, and she's traveling with a safe delegation or a safe group, traveling group, which is generally what we would consider nowadays. The question is whether that is analogous to Umrah and other types of similar trips. Yani there is, some scholars do say that if there is safety, right, you can guarantee safety generally, then there is some flexibility there. But otherwise, in principle, according to the sort of traditional view of the fuqaha, this would not be permissible. Wallahu a'lam. In which case, can a woman travel alone? Can a woman travel alone for a day trip to another city in the same country? If it's considered traveling, if you're traveling like 90, 100 plus miles, some fuqaha say like 48 miles. Some, the sort of in the Hanbali school, is actually more than that. It's about 86 miles. If you travel more than 86 miles, then you're considered a traveler. Therefore, you would need a mahram. Okay, so you need a mahram to travel in that situation. If I fall into a sin and touch a woman inappropriately, do I need to do ghusl, or is ghusl only after ejaculation? You don't need to do ghusl, you make tawbah. You make tawbah in this case, and you ask Allah to forgive you. What should I do if my husband is mistreating me? If he's seriously mistreating you, approach an imam, approach a scholar, a sharia council, right, and ask them to get involved. Okay, or ask your wali to get involved, ask your guardian to get involved if it's serious mistreatment. Wallahu alam. What is the role of husbands in Islam? It's quite a big question, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He describes the marital contract as being a mithaqan ghalidha. It's a very strong contract, right? It's not a simple affair. When you take someone in marriage, you have the responsibility to take care of them, provide shelter, food, clothing, shelter, right? This is purely from a legal perspective, but beyond that, you are also required to live with them in an honorable way. وَعَاشِرُهُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. Allah says, live with them in an honorable way, showing them kindness and care. This is something which is required. Obviously, how that is manifested will differ from person to person and circumstance to circumstance. But from a legal perspective, in terms of the finer legal points, then as long as he is providing for you, and he's clothing you and feeding you and providing for those needs, and he's done his very, very basic duty. But otherwise, what you should aspire to as a husband is to live with your wife in an honorable way. What can be done in a non-Muslim country when the husband doesn't give the amount he needs to give after divorce? Oh, so I think the implication here is that you have children. Maintenance issues. You should just go to a Sharia council and ask them to get involved, inshallah. What should I do if my wife is mistreating me? Right. Allahul Musta'an. I think someone asked that on purpose because there are a lot of questions coming about wrong husbands doing the wrong things, right? Well, I mean, mistreatment is a. I mean, what does that mean? How does a wife mistreat the husband, right? I mean, there are a variety of different ways. But as taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is key to, preventing anyone from doing anything wrong, right? But my advice, generally speaking, if you do have marital problems, this is probably not the best way to have it solved, right? Go and speak to someone directly. Because to give you tailored advice is very difficult if you don't know the details. So I don't want to say things and advise the wrong thing. Wallahu alam. Yes, brother. Yeah.
When it comes to Islam, so children are, the asl is that they're of the vulnerable category of people, right? So the man, like, for example, like if he sees kids, the dynamic, one of the first, the ways in which he has that dynamic with the child is that he's a protector of his in that sort of way, right?
Mm.
Do women come in that category as well, that by, like, automatically, they are also in that category, so that when you're interacting in whatever capacity, not just as husband, that you see them as being of a category that is vulnerable, and so therefore you have some sort of duty towards it.
Yeah, I mean, vulnerability. You consider someone vulnerable in those areas of vulnerability, right? Which can change depending on the circumstances. When Allah says, for example, وَلَا تُؤْتُ السُّفَهَاءَ أَمْوَالَهُمْ, that don't give the sufaha your wealth, right? That some interpret sufaha to refer to an-nisa as well, because they are safih from the perspective, traditionally speaking, they were safih because they didn't have any much knowledge of how to deal with financial matters, because they wouldn't trade. That was something that men would do. Nowadays, for example, women can trade. And it's very normal for women to trade and be involved in business and being CEOs and and working in that sense. So vulnerability can, can depend. It can depend. If it's a situation, for example, where a woman, for example, has no finances of her own, right? So she doesn't work. So she's completely dependent upon her husband, right, for living. And if her husband doesn't provide for her, then she's extremely vulnerable. So from that perspective, she'll be vulnerable, right? So it's not like vulnerability is something which is a permanent feature. It sort of depends whether that vulnerability exists or not. So it can differ from person to person. Yeah. Wallahu a'lam. Okay, inshallah. I think we will, yes, brother. Yeah.
I just wanted to know what is the crossing border of the crossing lines for the woman to deserve the divorce?
The crossing line, or okay, at what point basically can a woman be entitled to a divorce, you mean? Like she deserves it, or?
Yeah, she deserves to be divorced.
If the decision is down to the husband, right? So the husband can divorce his wife on many grounds, right? So if he, for example, wants to divorce her simply because he doesn't like her anymore, that's within his right. He can do that, right? If it's because he doesn't like her character, right, and that she's rebellious and that she doesn't get along with him, he has the right to divorce. So there's nothing in the Sharia that says, for a man in particular, right, that he needs a specific reason, right, to divorce his wife. I think you mean from the woman's perspective.
What do you consider rebel from the woman's side? Because I wanted to know then what you consider rebel from the woman. What behavior?
What type of behavior? As I said, there doesn't need to be a specific reason. It's not like for a woman. For a woman to ask for a divorce, she needs a very strong case. Right? She needs a strong case. But for the man, it's a lot more flexible for a man. If the man just says, look, it's your choice at the end of the day. It's absolutely down to the man's choice. And even if he had no reason, just say, I'm bored of my wife. Just say, right? I'm bored of my wife. I don't really enjoy your company anymore. I give you a divorce. Legally, that's valid. Obviously, that's not something I encourage, all right? And that's not how we should live. But you don't need to have you don't need to have a specific reason if a man wants to divorce a wife. Does that answer the question? So you thought otherwise. You thought that there has to be a strong reason. Is that what it is?
If as a man you have come to the conclusion to divorce your wife because your wife didn't apply your rules, which you say, for example, the wife is by the Sharia law
Yeah.
is obligated only to give you special needs, not for other things. But
Yeah.
you, as a husband, if you come to the point you don't like your wife because she's not cooking for you,
Okay.
respecting your parents,
Yeah.
you come to the point now, I'm hating you because you're not following my
Yeah.
words, and she's justifying herself. It's not my job to do.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Okay. That clarifies it more. So just for the benefit of the sisters, so the brother was asking. So for example, in a situation, imagine the sister, for example, she behaves in a particular way, like she's disrespectful to his parents, or she doesn't listen to him in things that is not technically an obligation upon her. Say, for example, he asks her, cook me a curry, and she said, no, I don't want to cook you a curry tonight. All right, yeah, right? So that might not be, purely from a Shari'i legal perspective, she might not be sinful, right? We can argue that. Does that justify divorce? So the point I'm making here is she doesn't have to do something haram for you to justify your divorce. So if, for example, you want your wife to cook you a particular type of food every day. Every day a different dish. Just say, is this wajib for her to do? No. But you really want that. And you say, look, I need to eat like this every day. This is how I was brought up. If you can't do this, sorry, but I don't want to remain married to you. I can give you, he has the right to give the divorce. So what I'm saying here is that it's not a condition that the woman has to be doing something haram for you to give the divorce. It's not a condition. Like, she doesn't have to be doing something haram. It could be that you don't get along with her. It could be that, look, she prays, she fasts, she does everything you tell her to do, but you just don't like her. Right? You are allowed, if you want to divorce her, from a Shari'i perspective, you are legally allowed. That doesn't mean, therefore, it's fine, go and divorce, etc. No, it doesn't mean that. But purely from a technical, legal perspective, you are allowed. Okay? Yeah. Yes. Final question, yeah?
Sister gets a khula and then she comes to you and you refuse. Is there no other way she can get out of marriage?
If a sister asks for a khula and the husband doesn't give it, right, she has the option of fasakh, which is to dissolve the marriage, but that has to be done through a shari'i, by a qadi, basically. Yeah, but she needs to have a very strong reason to, for that to happen. Right? Khula' is when the wife, she asks separation from her husband, and she says, please separate from me. I'll give you back your mahar that you gave me, but let's end the marriage. Yeah, and he says, okay, fine, give me back the mahar, and khalas. He says to her, khala'tuki, I've given you khula', and they separate. Yeah. Wallahu a'lam. Jazakumullah khairan, everybody, and inshallah I shall see you next week, inshallah. Subhanakallah wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka. Assalamu alaikum.